collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up this week, are both sides in Cyprus using the issue of Varosha for their own political purposes?
On the one hand, the president is using it in order to confuse refugees from Famagusta on the point, and on the other hand, FCAF is using it to say how great this procedure is and that it is part of their ownership of Varosha. Neither of the two are telling the truth.
The Supreme Court has ruled in favour of the victim in the Ayia Napa rape case. Will that mean that the original rape case will now be properly investigated?
We say that there is an obligation under international treaties, under national legislation, that the authorities fully investigate the rape claims submitted back in 2019.
And the Minister of Transport is upbeat about attracting more passengers into our buses with a 5G network.
This is something which I believe will be an extra incentive to attract passengers.
Earlier this week, the President of Cyprus said that the Immovable Property Commission in the north was a trap. And he said that Turkish Cypriots were taking advantage because of the zoning of properties in Varosha. This is a very complicated issue. Who better to unravel it for us than Nicosia lawyer Achilleas Dimitriadis? Achilleas, I'm very confused. We've spoken many times about the Immovable Property Commission. You've encouraged Greek Cypriots who have properties in the north to apply so that their name is on the list, as it were. And we've talked too about EVCAF, which is, I believe, a religious foundation, and they, again, it seems, have put in an application to the IPC. What on earth is going on?
Yes, well, I'm not surprised that you are confused. I think the matter is confusing, and especially the people who are dealing with it are using it for their own purposes. On the one hand, the president is using it in order to confuse refugees from Famagusta on the point, and on the other hand, FCAF is using it to say how great this procedure is and that it is part of their ownership of Varosha. Neither of the two are telling the truth. The truth is that FCAF is claiming that it owns Varosha. That claim, of course, is a bogus claim. It is a bogus claim because in 1960, when the Republic of Cyprus was established, FCAF and the Turkish Cypriots got 1.5 million sterling in full and final settlement of all their claims against the colonial government. Thus, they can no longer argue that the colonial government damaged their property and therefore they are now entitled to its return. The FCAF argument goes back in the Turkish times and the colonial regime afterwards, whereby a number of these properties were sold by the British colonial government, allegedly in breach of the FCAF laws. This matter was recognized by the colonial government and paid this 1.5 million, of which 500,000, and this you'll be interested to hear, was paid directly into the account of Dr. Kuchuk and Mr. Denktash to cover the urgent needs of the Turkish Cypriot community. Conveniently, FCAF does not mention this in any way. So on this basis, FCAF is trying to build this bogus claim, and in order to give it effect, it has applied to the Immovable Property Commission, where Greek Cypriots have applied for their property in Varosha, for the return of their property, and they claim that because we are interested in this property, we should be part of the proceedings, and the effect of this is that they are trying to deprive the Greek Cypriots of the ownership they have and of the right to return. That is as simply as I can put it.
All right, well, there are 3 vakifs, according to a report I read in the newspaper. So FCAF consists not just of one religious foundation, but several.
Oh, let me. So that's how FGAF is trying to get involved. What is FGAF and what does it do? FGAF is a charitable foundation. It's about 450 years old, if I'm not mistaken, and they operate on the basis of trust. Let me explain that. FGAF is the institution, and it's usually the trustee of property. So if you are a religious person, you donate this property to the trust. The trust is administered by FGAF, and it pays back to the beneficiaries of the trust certain amounts of money. On many occasions, the beneficiaries die, and therefore the property remains with FGAF, who continues to administer and collect the rents over the years. It's a little bit like the Lord system in England, where Lord so-and-so has property. When he passes away, the next Lord gets the property, and there is no inheritance tax or division of the property to the beneficiaries. And that's why it's interesting, because contrary to the way Christians were dealing with their property, where if they died, their children or spouse would inherit, in FGAF, in a VACFI, there is no such inheritance. The property remains whole because the trust continues to be the same owner. And that's why a number of these properties continue to be with FGAF, both in the occupied areas and in the areas under the control of the Republic.
So what about this idea of President Anastasiades saying that it's a trap because the properties claimed by FGAF were left out of the area that he says was offered as bait to Greek Cypriots through the IPC?
Well, the confusing thing, and that's where I think the refugees are really confused by the president, is that there is a big fuss about a procedural issue before the Immovable Property Commission in the occupied areas, whereas in fact this matter is currently before the European Court of Human Rights. And the president knows that, and the Cyprus government, which the president heads, has until the 15th of February to file their comments in reply to the Turkish arguments which support the claim of FGAF. So this matter will not be solved before the Immovable Property Commission. It will be solved before the European Court of Human Rights, and we expect this procedure to finish hopefully within this year.
What?
And that's why it is confusing, because the Cyprus government is party to proceedings in Strasbourg on the point, and yet claims are made in relation to procedural points in Nicosia.
Well, do you know whether or not the government has indeed submitted anything to that court?
Not yet. To my knowledge, not yet. I understand they got an extension, and now their deadline is on the 15th of February.
But what happens if they don't? Sorry, Achilleas, what happens if they don't submit any papers?
Oh, if they don't submit any papers, then the applicant has already filed documents proving that FGAF has a bogus claim. It's just that the Cyprus government, which is the government of the national bringing the case, has, to my mind, an obligation to support this Cypriot before the ECHR against Turkey, and also has a moral obligation, if not legal, to tell the European Court how the Cyprus Republic came about and how this colonial settlement of 1.5 million sterling has in fact deprived FGAF of any property claims after 1960. That is what really we want the Cyprus government to say.
Well, we don't, I suppose, hold our breath to see if they're going to. They haven't actually addressed the issue in this way at all ever, have they?
Well, that is exactly my point, and that's why I'm saying that the president is confusing the refugees from Varosha on this point. Because really the issue is that the legal matter will be solved in Strasbourg, and then those who have applied to the IPC will no longer face this preliminary objection because the FGAF argument will have been dealt with, and those who have applied will be eligible to return to their property, whereas those who have not applied for purposes of the IPC, which is run by Turkey, they will be considered as abandoned properties, and these abandoned properties will be given to whoever they think is appropriate. The problem is that the Cyprus government, since June 2019, has dismissed the Turkish warnings that they were going to open up Varosha. The Minister of Foreign Affairs said it's a pre-election gimmick. Later on, where Mr. Erdogan came, you remember the picnic in the rain in November 2020? Well, he said that again. And then in July 2021, they opened up part of Famagusta, 3.5%, of which miraculously FGAF has no claim. Now that, for me, proves the fallacy of the argument that FGAF owns Varosha.
Well, I'm not very much clearer than I think I was at the beginning. I do remember...
We should record this again.
I do think, though, I remember you saying when we spoke about this many months ago that the IPC might finish its job at the end of last year and accept no more requests.
Right. It got a 2-year extension. There was a 2-year extension from December 2021 to December 2023, where it has renewed its mandate to accept applications by Greek Cypriots for their properties in the occupied areas. The urgency of this matter is in relation to Varosha, because Varosha has always been a closed area, and now with the opening up of this area, if Greek Cypriots do not apply to regain control of their property, then the Turkish side will consider that property as abandoned and give it to anyone they want. Now, there is also an argument that UN Security Council resolutions 550 and 789 say that the UN should take control of Varosha and that the Greek Cypriot inhabitants should return. And I turn the argument round and say, well, why is the Cyprus government not asking the UN to enforce these resolutions in relation to the small area that has actually opened up? Why do the UN not take over the area that the Turkish government has opened for Greek Cypriot resettlement?
And why is it just a small area? What about people who have properties outside that area?
Well, reading Mr. Tatar's interview in the Sunday paper, his argument is that Varosha belongs to FGAF and they are opening it up in phases so that people may claim return, and if nobody claims, they will deal with it the way they want. So I think it's an administrative matter, and perhaps it's also a political bargaining point, because the solution of the Cyprus problem is obviously not in court. It will have to be a political solution, but I think they are simply pushing the Cyprus government into dealing with the matter, because so far nothing has happened on it. There were confidence-building measures in relation to Varosha that never materialized, and so they are opening up Varosha for use by the people they choose. And that is very dangerous, because Varosha was the only area not occupied by civilians, and if they give it to people, I'm very scared that it will become the Las Vegas of the Middle East, and the chances of having it back will be minimized.
Achilleas Dimitriades, prominent Nicosia lawyer, trying to unravel what is going on as regards the Immovable Property Commission in the north and the claims of the religious foundation FGAF.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Many of you will be familiar with what has become known now as the Ayia Napa rape case. It was a couple of years ago that a young English teen accused several Israeli boys of raping her at a resort in Ayia Napa. She later retracted her accusation, but there are a lot of questions about how that retraction was obtained. At her trial for public mischief, in other words, accusing her of making the whole thing up, she was convicted, but an appeal to the Supreme Court was heard this week, and they ruled that in actual fact she was not guilty of public mischief. One of her lawyers is Nicoleta Haralambidou, and she joins us now. Nicoleta, first and foremost, give us, if you will, a little bit of background to this whole affair, because perhaps not everybody is au fait with exactly what happened and then the consequences in terms of the legal repercussions.
Well, the story started in 2019 when this teenage British girl came to Cyprus to spend her holidays and at the same time working before she would start her university studies, as many other young people do that. She stayed at the Napa apartment where the majority of young people stay normally, and has to be said that they are recruited also from a specific company for this purpose. So she arrived in July 2019. Initially, she didn't have access to work from the first day. She had to get familiarized with the whole situation and how the system worked. We were told that she was given free access to drinks, free access to bars, whatever. And then, of course, the whole Nabarox hotel is something that we need to discuss eventually how it works. But in any event, she had a flirt with one Israeli boy, and eventually on the 17th of July, she came out in a very bad situation. She was shocked, she was trembling. The first person who saw her was a doctor, an in-house doctor of the Naparox apartment, who called the police to take care of her, and this is where she reported that she was raped by a number of people, possibly 12. She was initially treated as a victim of rape. She gave 2 statements. She had medical examinations and forensic examination, and they told her that she cannot leave the country before the investigation is over. And eventually, within 10 days, they asked her to go to the police station again in order to give some clarifications in relation to her first statement. And it is on that day, on the 27th of July, that she was questioned again. She was there for 6 hours in the police station. Not clear when she became from a victim a suspect, without access to a lawyer, without information about her rights to access to a lawyer at the right stage of the procedure. And in that context, she gave a retraction statement saying that what I reported as rape was wrong. I was not raped, and I did it because I realized that they were taking videos of me and I wanted to get back of them. This is the meaning of what she said. And on that basis, she was immediately accused for public mischief.
We should say, should we not, because at the time we spoke about this at length, Nicoleta, and I also studied things like the English in her retraction statement, which it's pretty clear to me as a native English speaker was not written or said by a native English speaker. There were a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people didn't understand, I think, exactly what went on in the police station during that 6 hours, because almost as soon as she had, in theory, retracted her statement, the suspects were flown pretty damn smartly back to Israel, weren't they?
Well, that's the thing, because on the basis of that retraction statement, in relation to the English language used for that statement, the defense brought a linguist to analyze that the way this was written could not be written by a native English speaker. Evidence that were dismissed from the first instance court is not really important, because according to the court, he didn't believe her. I mean, he found her not credible. This is something that we will explain later on now with the decision of the Supreme Court. But yes, nobody happened during those hours, and the most important thing is that on the basis exclusively of that retraction statement, taken under the conditions I described, the Israelis were allowed to leave the country. So the rape investigation stopped there. It was never fully investigated because everything stopped because of this retraction statement.
Now, I see in the newspaper this week that the police, on being questioned about all of this, say that they are going to investigate whether mistakes were made in their handling of the whole affair. What do you make of that?
I haven't seen any statements actually from the police. Did they make a statement that they're going to investigate, or this is what people are expecting the police to do?
Well, no, they say they're going to do it, but it's fairly clear, I think, if you tell us now what the Supreme Court said, it's very clear that investigation into the way the police handle the affair needs to be made. And what I think everybody wants to know is, since it seems that the Supreme Court believes in her initial statement she was saying that she'd been raped, that should the whole rape case be reopened?
This is our view, actually, that now the whole rape case should be reopened, and the decision of the Supreme Court on appeal is important, not because the Supreme Court examined anything that has to do with rape. And we have to clarify this. What the Supreme Court examined, it was the safety and correctness of the decision of the first instance court in relation to what she was accused and convicted for, public mischief. But because of the nature of the crime, the public mischief means that you are accused, and she was convicted for saying lies about an imaginative offense that never happened. So whether she was raped or not is directly relevant. In that sense, the findings of the Supreme Court are very important, because what the court said is that, okay, you have a 19-year-old filing a rape claim against her, you bring her to the police station, you have her there for 6 hours, and the court found that there have been violations of her right under the law in that context, access to lawyer and information, etc.
Or a policewoman there with her. I mean, all of these things are surely standard procedure, or they should be.
They should be, and this is what now the police needs to investigate in the sense that the findings of the Supreme Court are there. They cannot question them. But they need to see exactly why this was done in this way and what are the reasons.
I seem to recall, Nicoletta, that when we spoke about this those couple of years ago, we were also talking about the fact that it wasn't apparently standard procedure for police interviews to be recorded. Now, has that changed? Because obviously in a case like this, if it had been recorded, it would be very obvious who said what and why.
No, as far as I know, it has not been changed. There was a discussion at the House of Parliament of regulating this so that they are recorded. But I would like to stress something that is important. Even if you have a recording system, this can also be manipulated. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem. The problem will be solved when you have police officers who understand, they apply the law correctly, they understand the vulnerabilities, but specifically when it comes to sexual violence against women. I think these are the major issues that one needs to see what went wrong and why we had this outcome and this result. Because even if you have recording, okay, it's another safeguard, it is an additional safeguard, but it's not the only solution. Police officers need to change, in my view, their mentality and the way they see things. Right,
well, I know that there have been some training sessions with a limited number of police officers, so we can presumably hope that things in that sense will improve. But the final thing is back to those Israeli boys who were originally accused of this crime, and they've had no comeback whatsoever. Is it feasible within the law for the case to be reopened and those young people to be called back to Cyprus to answer their own investigation?
Well, this is something for the Cypriot authorities to see how they are going to achieve. We say that there is an obligation under international treaties, under national legislation, that the authorities fully investigate the rape claims submitted back in 2019. They allowed the Israeli boys to leave, but we all know Cyprus has very good relations with Israel. They have signed many bilateral agreements. Both of them are members to the European Convention on Extradition. So if there is a will to proceed, There are tools that are available to the prosecution authorities of Cyprus to proceed.
Well, we'll wonder whether or not they will make use of those tools, or whether indeed political expediency and keeping up good relations with neighbours actually has an impact on whether or not a potential crime is investigated. Always a pleasure talking to you, Nicoletta. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rosie. Thanks a lot.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Last week I attended a press presentation of 5G in the buses running in Nicosia and Larnaca. They are run by Cyprus Public Transport, and in attendance was our Minister for Transport, Communications and Works, Yanis Karouzos. After the presentation, I caught up with him and asked him how important he thought it was for 5G to be available in our buses so that more people would consider taking public transport rather than using their private cars.
Of course, it's very important. It's a service which it's an added value for the whole bus system in Cyprus, and the experience is something which I believe will be an extra incentive for passengers, to attract passengers. Is the first bus company in Europe who implements such a facility in the buses, and I'm very confident that it will be the advantages will be a lot, and that the public will attract even more passengers to it will increase the passengers to the bus.
The other thing, of course, that your ministry I think is trying to do is to get people out of cars onto bicycles or walking. Now tell me a bit about the infrastructure for bicycles, because various things have been suggested, but it seems that we still don't really have the mentality among our drivers to respect that there are other road users who are more vulnerable than they are.
Yes, first of all, the infrastructure for bicycles in Cyprus is quite satisfactory. We are not lacking of infrastructure. We have announced the length, how many kilometers of bicycle roads, not lanes, roads. We have about 186 kilometers are already constructed and used in all the counties of Cyprus. For example, in the Famagusta area where I live, almost all the villages and cities are connected with bicycle lanes. But you are quite right that we still don't have the mentality for the culture for promoting correctly and respecting those who circulate and use the bicycles. That's why in the next one of our next initiatives, now that we are finalizing and we have completed our initiatives with regards to motorbikes, now we will do something similar with regards to bicycles, with regards to road safety, with regards to some incentives to increase their road safety equipment, and many more. So it's the next initiative which we will take over. It will be with regards to bicycle. More and more people will turn and use the bicycles. When we announce the incentive scheme we had for buying bicycles, about 8,000 people applied within just 4 hours, so 1% of the population of Cyprus applied. So that means there is interest and there is the will, and there is a good area to build the culture for using the bicycles. And plus we have a strategy now. We have an action plan with 17 actions approved by the cabinet, which we started implementing, and the majority of them, about 10 out of the 17 actions, are already in progress or under implementation.
I just have to take you to task on the thing about the bicycles and the grants that you gave to people.
Yes.
I've heard people suggest that they were going to apply, get the grant, buy a bike and then sell it. Now, sorry, if that happens, that's disastrous, surely.
The plan of the bicycle or the incentive scheme is something similar, which it goes around Europe. So it's under the similar principles, under the same designs, or where the 50-60 similar plans exist in the EU.
But you have no way of checking whether anybody's going to profit.
The goal is to have more bicycle in the market. There is no way to control if somebody is using the bike. There is no way to cross-reference it. So we have to trust the people, and sometimes we have to start with having the glass half full and not half empty.
Cyprus Minister for Transport, Communications and Works, Yannis Karouzos, talking to me last week. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.